and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Forecasting Engagement and Retention. Today's webinar is pre-approved for 1 general recertification credit hour through the HR Certification Institute. To receive your certificate, you must be logged in so we can verify your attendance, and the certificate will be emailed to the email address provided during registration. The certificate with the program ID as well as access to the recorded webinar will be emailed to you early next week. And I think I'm having a little bit of an echo, so I'm going to change my line real quick for everybody. I'm Stephanie Gilbert from Health Calling, and we are proud to be sponsoring today's webinar with Healthy Careers. Health Callings and Healthy Careers are both part of the Dice Holdings family of career sites and are the leading healthcare forces-focused job board. Our 100% focus on the healthcare industry and association partnerships help us to provide unparalleled access to healthcare job seekers across all disciplines and specialties. Coupled with best-in-class tools and customer service, we make it easy to find your next hire faster. In addition to being the leading solution for healthcare HR professionals and recruiters, we also seek to provide you with information and tools that provide your ability to do your job. So we're pleased to be sponsoring today's retention webinar presented by Dick Finnegan, CEO of C-Suite Analytics. Mr. Finnegan is the premier thought leader on retention in the healthcare workplace and has published 2 books on the subject and is a past speaker for Sherman ASHRA. One final housekeeping item before we get started. Due to the number of participants on today's call, all lines are muted for the duration. There will be an opportunity to answer questions following the presentation. You may submit questions at any time through the chat box, and they will be answered at the end of the webinar in the order they are received. Today's webinar will last about an hour, and we're glad you chose to join us. Now, without further delay, I'll turn it over to Dick for today's presentation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Dick Finnegan, and I'm talking to you today from Atlanta. I'm actually on a client site in Atlanta. It's raining here. I hope you're having good weather wherever you are. If you're in the Northeast, spring is coming, I promise. Our webinar today is about forecasting. It's about really a new topic about forecasting engagement and forecasting retention. And what I'm going to do is show you some data first to inspire you to forecast, then tell you why it works, then tell you how it works, and then offer you some free tools that will help you along the way. So, short introduction to our agenda, and now the screen you should be seeing says healthcare data. And there's a summary to this slide. The slide is the industry you chose is the toughest one for retention and maybe the hardest one for engagement. And there's so much data that tells us this, but just to give you an example, the unemployment rate for anybody in the U.S. with a college degree is 3.3%. Now that's so much different than the 6-point-somethings you hear all the time on the news. And if you cut it down to industry, healthcare, 3.0. There's none that's lower. And we used to say, when I say we, it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's not me. Used to say that full unemployment was 4%. That if unemployment reached 4%, everybody who wants a job has a job. Now they're saying, no, it's 5.2% because so many people dropped out of the workforce. So full employment is 5.2 and we're at 3.0. It tells you anybody who's healthcare certified who isn't working doesn't want to be working. We also know, you can see the bad news about nurses, most recession-proof job, least satisfying job by another study, highest projected shortage of workers by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Then we know 27% of fresh-out nurses quit. They can't get through a year. So the hill is steep for engagement and retention in healthcare. Now, to give you another national look, it is no surprise that when the economy got better after the recession, that voluntary quits increased. So if we take the January 2014 number of 1.7% and multiply it by 12 months, we get 20.4. Now what that means is that, assuming that projection is fair, and if you look at the ones above it, it seems to be in the progression line, that 20% of U.S. workers quit their jobs every year. It doesn't mean they get fired. It doesn't mean they get laid off. They just say, I quit. So that number keeps going up. And obviously, it's driven significantly by the economy. But also, as you look at its progression, you would say, hey, maybe we're not doing the right things to retain people. Let's look at data now about engagement, which clearly says engagement is stuck. So I want you to learn how to read this chart. If you put your eye down to the bottom, it says actively disengaged in black, not engaged in a light color, and engaged in green. And then if you run your eye north of engaged, what you see is from 2000 forward, the percent of engaged employees in the U.S. is between 26% and 30%. And if you look at the trend line, there's no definitive trend line. It's not getting worse. It's not getting better. It's just stuck in that little zone of 26 to 30. Then if you move right to the left and you see not engaged, the point there is, while that's the biggest bucket of people, they're not partially engaged. They're not sort of engaged. They're just not engaged. And then if you go to the group that's represented in the color black to the left, they're actively disengaged. And one of the terms that Gallup uses for this group is they sabotage. They're trying to hurt your company instead of help it. So when you look at that data and say that's the U.S. workforce, well, no wonder there's a lot of productivity to be gained. Now, you go to the right of the slide, and you'll see data from Burson that says U.S. companies are on track to spend $1.53 billion each year to improve engagement on surveys and on programs. And for those of you who are on the call from small companies, I can't remember this fact, but it was significant. Something like 70% of companies with less than 100 employees still do engagement surveys. So everybody's doing these surveys. And they get the results, they don't know what to do, and they do more and more programs, and nothing is changing the degree of engagement in the U.S. Picture for a moment, if you put on whatever favorite 24-hour news station you watch, and they said, the government released a study that said, so pick your bad thing, teenage pregnancy, teenage smoking, violent crime, pick your bad subject, and said, we're spending $1.53 billion each year, and we haven't changed it. The Republicans would blame the Democrats would blame the Republicans. There'd be specials on CNN. So you get the idea. This is something that nobody talks about, but it's an incredible investment of money and energy that all of us are doing that isn't moving the needle. And I would go so far as to say on engagement, a good question for all of you would be, does your organization set a goal when you do an engagement survey? And if your answer is, well, we hope to do better than the last time, or, well, we hope to be at least at the benchmark, that's not a goal. That's like saying, think about benchmark. Benchmark is a synonym for average, and average is a synonym for mediocre. This is the only subject I know in business where we're thrilled to be mediocre when we hit the benchmark on engagement. We really don't even have a dream that we can get significantly ahead of the benchmark. So something's really busted. And I'm going to show you in the most simple terms what's busted. And I'm going to start with this slide that says, are your retention efforts driven by accountabilities or are they driven by programs? Now, what I mean by that is, if you look to the left of the slide, that when something gets out of whack in organizations, like the examples I have there are sales, service, quality, or safety. If something isn't right, the CEO goes to the EVP, who goes to the VP, on and on and on, because it is addressed and solved on the operating side of the organization. So think about your organization chart, who reports to who, not on the staff side, not on the HR side, not on the OD side, not on the training side, not on the marketing side, not the finance side, but in the business side, the operations side, who reports to who. That's the way important issues are solved. The question becomes, for employee retention, and the same goes for employee engagement, who is in charge of making those things better? So are there accountabilities? Does the EVP have accountability with consequences for his or her engagement score and the ones beneath him or her and his or her retention results? Or is it driven from the side? Is it HR? You do the report. You have to go figure this out. What are you going to do? Where HR says, we know we got this solved. We're going to solve. We know from survey results and exit surveys that employees don't feel recognized. We're going to fix that. And we're really going to fix that. We're going to have Employee of the Week, Employee of the Month, Employee Parking Space, and Employee Appreciation Week. And we know employees want to be, they want more communication. We're going to have town hall meetings once a quarter. We're going to have a better newsletter. We know employees want better career guidance. We're going to bring out a brown bag speaker series from somebody from the community college to talk about careers. In other words, are things solved with programs on the right side of the slide or with business-driven accountabilities and reports and numbers and goals on the left side? So as you think about this, and especially if you're sitting in a room with others, I'd like you to just kind of look around quickly around the table and say, well, which side are we on? Are we on the left or are we on the right? And as you're thinking about this, I want to tell you that through studies, 86% of the time, the answer is HR accountability, not operations accountability. Now, if that reflects your situation, then think of the simplicity of this solution, that we wonder who impacts engagement and turnover more. Is it leaders on the left or HR on the right? And we have 6 different studies on this slide that say if you have a turnover problem, look first to your managers from the really great book, First Break All the Rules, written by 2 Gallup consultants. Primary reason you seek a new job is you don't like your boss. Why do employees stay? Managers first, coworkers second, nothing about pay, nothing about benefits, nothing about Employee Appreciation Week, nothing about free parking, nothing about HR, nothing about programs. Managers first, coworkers second. Poor leadership causes over 60% of all turnover. When employees stay, it's because they're immediate managers, and that's talking about teachers and principals who don't ordinarily associate teacher retention with principal relationships, but it's the biggest driver. Then we get a new twist. Employees who stay primarily for their supervisors stay longer, perform their jobs better, and are more satisfied with their pay. So now we say, Stephanie, who introduced the program today, if I reported to Stephanie and I really like working with Stephanie, so if I stay because I like working with Stephanie, not because of my pay or something else, then I stay longer, I perform better, I'm more satisfied with my pay. So if you take that idea of pay, and we're going to take it one step further, in a pointed study by Connexa interviewed 1,000 people who recently quit and asked about pay, benefits, development, advancement, and relationship with supervisors, and they got the straight flush, that the more you liked your supervisor, the more you liked your pay, benefits, development, and advancement, and the less you liked your supervisor, the less you liked your pay, benefits, development, and advancement. So Connexa said, if you give more money, there on the bottom of the slide in the green, if you give higher salary, developmental, advancement opportunities, it might not be enough. It might not be related to why people quit or also why people disengage, because the primary driver of those things is supervisors, not employee programs. So I'm going to go backwards a couple of slides and say, so think about where you are on the slide. And if you're on the right, you've got a very steep climb. If you're on the left, and leaders are truly accountable for engagement or retention, you're off to a good start. Now, let's suppose you get your survey back, your engagement survey, and a leader's score is substandard, whatever that might mean, and they have to do an action plan. They do an action plan, and they say, we're going to have more town hall meetings, better newsletter, and they just say programs, and 3 months later, nobody remembers what their score was or what their action plan was, then you don't have accountability. Accountability means goals and consequences, so you don't have accountability. But if we could have accountability on the left side, we would win on retention and engagement, because as I've just shown to you, what drives engagement and retention is leaders. And I'll give you one last piece of data about it. A truly wonderful study where a group of hospitals had high nurse turnover, and all but one of them said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have even better programs. And I remember the study. They said we're going to have on-site child care. We're going to have flexible scheduling. That will cut our turnover. One outlier hospital says, we've had enough of this stuff with programs. We're going to go to our clinical directors and say, here's a report that has your name on it. Here's your current turnover. We want you to drop it by this much. We're going to publish this report every month. That's all we're going to do. that hospital saw nurse turnover go down 41%. The other hospitals that added the additional programs found it to stay the same. So all you need to know is if you're trying to solve engagement and retention with programs, you're not going to get there. If you can cross the bridge to get leaders to understand and executives to set goals for leaders, you can get there. And one key way, by the way, to get executives to set goals for leaders is to move them from thinking about turnover as a percent and engagement as a score to actual dollar values. And an example I'll give is if you go to the CEO and say turnover is 15%, the CEO can't relate to that, so the CEO will inevitably say, what's the benchmark? How do we compare to others? If you say 18%, the CEO will say, gosh, we're doing great. We're just losing 15% of our team every year. But if you say to the CEO, our turnover is 15% and it's costing us $6.36 million a year, your CEO will never ask about the benchmark because the benchmark doesn't matter. Being a hair better than average or being average is no big accomplishment. So as we wind down here today, one of the things that I'll do is offer you a paper on how to put costs on turnover and costs on engagement. So let me give you one other sneak peek about the power of leaders. Many of us are tuned into the Fortune Top 100 companies to work for, and this comes out in their magazine every February, and the last 3 years, the winner has been Google every year. So on the left side, you can see people playing ping pong. That was the picture in 2012. On the right side, you see a woman coming down a slide between floors. That was the picture they showed for Google in 2013. The 2014 picture is a couple people around a fellow with a laptop. And so every time that Google wins, they'll tell a story about all the great things, the campuses they have, the horseshoe pit, they have free eyebrow shaping, all sorts of free foods, they'll tell you about all these programs. But if you go to the last page of the report every year in the smallest font you can imagine, you will read that it says that 67% of the best company score is based on how much employees trust their leaders, which means it's not based on ping pong tables and not based on slides. We also know, by the way, that the financial performance, as you read the slide with me, of publicly traded companies, the ones where we can see the results financially, are the top 100, consistently outperforms the major stock indices by 300%. So all this tells us one clear lesson. The companies that have supervisors who build trust are the companies that make a lot more money. So I tell you all this because I want to compare it back to what I call the staples, exit surveys. Do they work? Well, they take a long time because we have so many questions. All we want to know is one question: why did you leave? There's now a book that says, don't tell the truth on exit surveys. It's the worst thing you can do in your career. We allow an answer like better opportunity, and we check whether it's an interview or some kind of an online assessment or tool. If you check better opportunity, okay, you're done. And that, of course, means we can't do anything about that because we don't know what it means. It's hard to follow up. There's no changes. They really are autopsies. And with engagement surveys, we get average thinking versus what top performers think because the data is anonymous, and therefore it's as though everyone thinks the way this one line of data says, which, of course, isn't true. We get opinions, but we don't know how important the items are. We get long delays in administration and data, and we build short-term programs. So neither of those things is as effective as some other ideas I'll show you today. Let's talk about this idea. I talk about skills, and I talk about programs. So it is not unusual. Here we have on the left side communications, recognition, career development. I've already given these examples, but it is typical as a result of exit survey data or engagement survey data to say we solve communications with town hall meetings, better newsletters. We solve recognition with employee of the month and front row parking space. We solve career development with brown bag lunches, with speakers for careers. So box checked, we have those things. But the next time you do an engagement survey and you look at the action plans for managers, I would look for things about whether or not they're saying, I will improve my skills. So, for example, for communications, I'm going to ask every direct report in the next 30 days what information she wants to know and what information I need to probe for and hear, then adjust my daily and weekly communications as a result. So that's a real thing to improve communications. For recognition, I'm going to track myself to ensure I provide at least one example of positive feedback to each employee each week. I'm going to note which are more responsive to public versus private praise. Now, there's a good action item. For development, I'm going to ask each employee what he wants to learn and develop a plan to provide that learning either by mentoring, by on-the-job experience, by coursework, but I'm going to do something to help my people learn. I think that's something that's important to them, and I can do that through supervision instead of bringing in a career speaker with a Brian Bag Luncheon series. So I tell you this because it's so much more important to develop supervisory skills in these action plans than just more programs and programs and programs. Getting back to our original slide about is it accountability driven or is it program driven? So how do we engage employees more and retain them longer? All the data tells us get three things right. Give them a manager they trust, give them peers who hold up their end of the deal and who they like to work with, and give them duties that they like to do and duties that sometimes challenge them. If we can get those three things, and I want to get off on just a short tangent about trustworthy managers. If all of you, if we were all in a room, and there's several hundred of us, we were all in a room, and I said, raise your hand if this was true. And I then said, think about the best boss you ever had and the worst boss you ever had, and I'll bet you trusted your best boss and just trusted your worst boss. I think you'd all raise your hands. And then if I said, tell me if this is true, that your best boss had shortcomings that you easily accepted, you almost thought it was cute that they couldn't do something well, that your worst boss had strengths that you were blindfolded to, you couldn't possibly see because you didn't trust him or her, I think you'd all raise your hands too. And I'm a therapist. I'm a head bobber by training. And I know from all that training and work I've done that the human relationships spin mainly on two variables, trust and self-esteem. You stick with people who are looking out for you, and you stick with people who make you feel good about being you. So if we could get that chip in every manager's head, we would win. Unfortunately, organizations are full of stress, they're full of competition, they're full of bad stuff that makes trust hard to do. But think about the leaders in your company, and I'll bet you the ones who build trust best with their teams have higher engagement and higher retention, and I'll bet you the ones who can't build trust have higher turnover and lower engagement. And oh, by the way, trustworthy manager, reliable peers, right fit duties are all in the hands of those managers. So if you're sitting in a company and you say, the lights come on, we try to solve turnover, we try to solve engagement, but we let managers off the hook, they've got to be incredibly on the hook because they are the focus. They are through which all solutions must be driven, and frankly, not through HR. So, summary lesson. It's not what you give them, it's how you treat them. And continuing to do things the way we've always done them is not going to get us to the right place. So the slide says a C-word story from China. And I'm going to tell you a very brief story of what this is about. We have clients in China. Our partner company is named the Human Resources Excellence Center of China. The CEO there is a fellow who's smart, trustworthy, somebody I've become very close friends with. And we sat in a restaurant in Shanghai a couple of years ago, and he said, what's the real truth about engagement and retention? We've done everything with our clients the companies in the U.S. do, and nothing changes. And so I laid out for him what I've laid out for you. And I told him that the critical thing is to move responsibility over to leaders and have them have goals and accountabilities and then give them tools. And he listened and listened, and he has that way of looking you in the eye, not changing his facial expression, not nodding his head, but he doesn't miss a thing. And when I finally finished, he paused and he said a sentence I'll never forget. He said, for HR executives to do what you ask, they must have courage. So the C word is courage. And so I'm going to give you some ideas of what to do, but I will tell you, you have to have courage. because it's going against the grain how other companies do things, and it's going against the grain of what some HR people would recommend upstream. So let me ask you to put on your courage hat, put on your merit badges as we go forward. And I put this here for a reason. I want to advise you that we're going to a place where few people go. So let's talk about forecasting retention. And I'm going to make a recommendation to you that, one, leaders forecast retention for each employee based on the information they have. So literally, for everybody, if you have 10 people on your team, I want you to forecast how long you think each of them will stay. So it's not forecasting a percent for the organization or a percent for a unit. It's each leader becomes a forecaster for how long I think people will stay based on the information I have. And then I'm going to show you a way to input those forecasts. And then we ask leaders to build stay plans. Okay, if you think they're going to stay here that long, what things are you going to do to keep them? And don't tell me you have Employee Appreciation Week. Tell me about things that matter to individual employees. And then executives review the forecasts and the plans versus performance ratings. In other words, all right, so for all of our employees, here's the ones who are rated the highest. Let's look at their forecast for how long they will stay, and where should we red circle because we're really worried because a very high performer, very important person in sales or IT or somewhere else is forecasted to not be here within the next 6 months. Let's go find out what that's about. So it is individual manager forecasting. It's no other kind. Now, there are some models being introduced that say, pay us some money, consulting company, pay us some money, we'll come apply this model, and we'll tell you which departments or which employees or who's most at risk. And I think that's a good thing if the model works. What makes it limited in its goodness is if you know this department's at risk because the people have these skills are in great demand, so therefore they're at risk. If you then do a survey to find out what they want and treat them all the same, then you're not doing anything any better than what you're probably doing now. So it's got to be leader-driven one-on-one. It's the only way I think it gets to the outcome of improving retention and engagement versus just getting more data. So let me show you what one of our clients calls a heat map. So what we have here is the leader, upper left, his name is Rodriguez. There are 4 direct reports, Kim Johnson, Bert Brown, Cindy Stone, and Ralph Jimenez. The performance ratings are on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being high. So we have a 4 and a 5 and a 3 and a 2, so we're dispersed there. And what Rodriguez is saying is, based on what I know, Kim Johnson will be here within a year. And if you go to the far right of that line, we're going to give Kim a mentor, but because she wants to learn something else, I've assigned somebody to help teach her some things. But she'll be here a year. She's a 4 out of 5. She's a good performer, so I think we're in good shape there. Bert Brown is our best performer at a 5, but if you run your eye to the right, whoops, we got problems. He's red. He's going to be gone in 6 months because Bert said, I am burnt out. Headhunters call me all the time. Either develop skills to promote me to a manager job, and if you don't, I'm going to leave. And our perspective is we're building those skills for Bert. We hope to keep him. We hope he can build the skills for a manager. We're not sure he's manager material. We hope he can make it. We also hope he doesn't take one of those calls and go interview and leave in the next few months while we're training him. So we're in danger. We're doing what we can. We have a plan with Bert, but we're in danger. He's in the 0 to 6 months box. Cindy Stone's a medium performer. If you're on your eye to the right, she's pleased with her current role, and so we'll say she'll be here in a year. Ralph's a below-average performer. We're coaching Ralph for performance to the far right. We think, he's 6 to 12 months at best. If he responds to the coaching, and if we think he wants to stay here, we'll make him green. But if he doesn't respond to the coaching, or if we think he doesn't want to be here anyhow, he becomes red. We might even fire Ralph before this is over. So imagine if you had this data for all of your employees, and you could run this data by job, you could run it by performance rating, you could run it by green, by yellow, by red. This is what our clients do to improve retention and engagement. They forecast retention at the leader level, and the leader becomes accountable for his or her forecast. So one way to get this data is through, as the slide says, the power of stay interviews. And I tell you this from my heart, because I am now convinced, after being involved very much with stay interviews, that they just surpass all the soft skills training you can do. You can train situational leadership, you can train communication skills, but if you train leaders to conduct stay interviews on a schedule, not the same schedule as performance reviews, because they should be done opposite of performance reviews at a different time and twice with new hires, then give them retention goals and engagement goals, teach them the cost of these things, teach them to build trust, and train them to do stay interviews and give them the tool to do it and create reports based on those forecasts. How can turnover and engagement not improve? How can it not improve? And all this work is based on this book that you see that I was asked to write by Sherm. I didn't want to write it. It was too much work. I was asked, and finally I did the smart thing that I didn't know was smart at the time, and I said, okay. And I wrote the book. It's the top-selling Sherm published book for the last 2 years. Google hits on the term stay interviews were less than 1,000 when I wrote the book. If you're in front of your computer now and want a diversion, go Google stay interviews, see what number you get. It's always around 300 million when you do it. So it's not a fad, it's a trend. It's the best way I know. So imagine if you have leaders who conduct stay interviews, and based on those stay interviews and the data they get and the stay plans they build, they then forecast. Now you've got real data that you can work on, and now you have data to which to hold them accountable. So, speaking of accountable, here's one way to hold leaders accountable for retention, and I'm going to get to engagement in just a moment. So, 3 leaders here, Murbach, someone on our team, me, Murphy, our labradoodle, and retention goals, 2 goals, all turnover 15% in this example, and then all first-year turnover, so a separate goal for first year, 5%. So all the goals are the same for Murbach, Finnegan, and Murphy. Performance is not the same. Murbach, 13 and 3. She's within the goals. There's her cost, 105,000 and change, 31,000 and change. So now we know, because we have cost data, that this is a really important metric versus just percentages. Finnegan, 10 and 5. Of course, I made myself within compliance with my costs. And Murph, 22 and 11. And Murph's costs are much higher. And because Murphy's out of compliance, it's not unusual for our clients to have their part of the report in a different font, in italics, in bold, or something. Because we've got to make retention accountability really important. Really important. So think back. I won't go back in the interest of time. I'd have to flip through too many slides. But think back to that slide in the beginning about, is it built on accountability or is it built on programs? When you build on accountability, you win. And oftentimes you need those cost figures for your CEO and other executives to understand, wow, we better ratchet up the importance of engagement and retention rather than put it as a secondary or even tertiary metric, which is where we have it now. So, by the way, a thought about exit interviews, a very good positive thought. You see the numbers on top, 12 divided by 6,000 equals less than 1%. In the last about 2 years, in speaking at SHRM, speaking at ASHRA, speaking at various conferences to a lot of HR people, I've constantly asked, how many of you do exit surveys, and how many of you have found them to have a significantly positive effect on your company? 2 questions. So on the first one, I've asked about 6,000. Almost everybody raises their hands. Yes, we do them. When I've said how many have found them to have a significantly positive effect, the answer so far is 12. 12 people out of 6,000 have raised their hands. And if you say, well, maybe they want to raise their hand. So if you multiply 12 by 10 and you get 120, you still have a very low percent. So I question whether exit surveys are worth it. I know it's something companies do. They go out and they hire vendors, they sign contracts, or smaller companies do it one-on-one and take the time. I just don't know that you get data that's worth anything, and I don't know, even if you did, if you would apply it in such a way to make changes. So what we do instead is say to our client companies, when somebody leaves, why don't you instead have their manager go to the employee's supervisor who's leaving and say, these 5 questions. Did you see this exit coming? What was your forecast for this employee? What holes were in your retention plan? Who else on your team do you need to address where you might be missing something? And what lessons have you learned? That to us, this is a better solution than regular exit interviews. Again, courage. It takes courage to change what you're doing. So let's go back. Remember on engagement, I showed you this slide that says we're stuck. You remember this green column just doesn't change much, 26 to 30%, and we're spending a heck of a lot of money to buy these surveys and to do the follow-up programs. So I'm going to go backwards for a moment. Notice the black group to the left, actively engaged, the light green in the middle, not engaged, the darker green to the right, engaged. So let's look at the definitions. Engaged employees work with passion and feel a profound connection to their company. They drive innovation and move the organization forward. Not engaged employees are essentially checked out. They're sleepwalking through their workday, putting time but not energy or passion into the work. Now, let's look at how many are sleepwalking. That's, let's just take the top. 30, 18, okay, I got to squint my eyes. That's 52%. Yeah, that's what it is. So more than half, almost all the time, are sleepwalking. Now the bottom group, actively disengaged, aren't just unhappy at work. They're busy acting out their unhappiness. Every day these workers undermine what their engaged coworkers accomplish. So, huge problem here. Not big problem, huge problem here. And if we look at data, this is a separate study from Gallup. Gallup looked at their database and said the top 25% of companies for engagement versus the bottom 25% of companies for engagement show 22% increase in profitability. That's all you really need to know. But then 21% increase in productivity, then customer ratings, 41%, wow, quality defects, 48% in safety incidents, 41% patient safety incidents, 37% and 20%. You get the idea that companies that have much higher engagement do everything better. They're the companies where you want to work. They're the company you want your company to be if it's not this company already. Then we say, wow, turnover is lower. It's either 65% lower in what they call high turnover companies or 25% lower in what they call not 65% in what they call high turnover industries or 25% lower in low turnover industries. Also, a lot of math here, but follow through. If you have 9.3 engaged employees to 1 disengaged, you have a 147% higher earnings per share versus 2.6% engaged and 1 disengaged, where you have 2% lower earnings per share. So it's driving everything. This engagement drives everything. Our CEOs don't know this because they think it's just a score on a survey. Now, more data. Great Place to Work Institute. They're the ones who do the surveys for the Fortune Top 100. Say committed and engaged employees who trust their management perform 20% better than other employees. Companies with committed and engaged employees have half the voluntary turnover rates of their competitors. Big one, half the voluntary turnover rates. The turnover and engagement go hand in hand. The financial performance, I said this earlier, the publicly traded companies are 100 best companies that outperform major stock indices by 300%. Now, if you'd rather see that in a chart, look at this, it's 366%. That the companies that make the Fortune Top 100, which is driven by trusting your supervisors, 2/3 of the score, can significantly outperform the major stock indices. Different study. You had studied 1,500 companies where 60 to 70% of employees were engaged. Average total shareholder return, or TSR, was 24.7. But if only 49 to 60 were engaged, it fell to 9.1. If 25% or fewer engaged employees, a negative total shareholder return. So think about your organization. Think about who's engaged, who's not engaged, how many are engaged. But think also about, more importantly, how much do your executives appreciate those scores? And how much do they appreciate them, not just by company, but by leader and by division in order of accountability? More studies. Connexa studied 64 companies. Top quartile for engagement achieved twice the annual net income of those in the bottom quartile. They conducted another longer-term study. 39 organizations. Those with engagement top quartile had 7 times greater 5-year total shareholder returns than organizations bottom quartile. Similarly, Work USA Watson Wyatt surveyed 13,000 employees, found companies with highly engaged employees earn 26% more revenue per employee. So we go on and on and on. And I'm showing you all these studies to get to 1 point, all right? That engaged employees do more things better that substantially drive productivity, profitability, and shareholder returns. 2, each study covers a broad range of industries and companies. But 3 is the important one. Only the top box counts. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to go backwards and show you something. I want you to notice, when Gallup did these definitions, they didn't say the top group is engaged, the middle is sort of engaged. They said, except for the top group, the middle is checked out, and the bottom people are undermining other people. So it's not like, go back one more, it's not like we're saying the top and the middle is okay, the bottom is not. The middle is not good. So when you get your score from, if you use a survey company and they give you a score, here's my guess. And you need to ask them this question. My guess is they give you a score, let's say it's 59, 61, 68, maybe 72. If it's in that zone, the chance is they're telling you the top and the middle combined. You don't care about the middle. The middle does not drive your productivity and your profitability. Only the top does. So if they're giving you benchmarks, tell them you don't want to know your benchmarks against the top and the middle. You only want to know your benchmarks against the top. Having said that now, let's go back to where we were, because it gets us to a question. And the question is, which forecasting question is better for engagement? You could say to managers, will your survey results increase over the last time this time? What will be your survey score this time? Well, last time I was at 59, this time I'll get to 61. Well, they're just throwing a dart. Or you could ask, will this employee, each individual employee, score in the top box? And I want to argue and convince you that's the answer. That's the answer. What you want to say to managers is, okay, when we do the next survey, for each employee, just as you're going to forecast how long they're going to stay, we want you to forecast which of them will score in the top box. Now, I know, and you know, and they know, we will not know if their forecast is accurate employee by employee because we don't get scores employee by employee. But we'll know if they say 70% of their people will score in the top box and they get a medium or low score, that they missed it. So the important thing here, and it's different than the other, the important thing here is not to score them against their forecast. It is instead to motivate them, to incent them to work on engagement. So when the assessment is taken, that therefore they get more people in the top box. Your goal, not just you if you're on this call, but your organization, is to get as many employees highly engaged, not that middle, the top. That's the goal. It's not to increase the score for the middle and the top, it's to increase the score for the top. So I would have them forecast for each employee, will they score in the top box? And if I was their manager, I'd come back to them and say, okay, you have 4 that they will and 6 that they won't. Let's talk about this 6. Why not? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure how to do this. Well, let's work on that. Your goal is to get coaching and attention to increase the number of employees who score in the top box. So, let's wrap up and say, first of all, when Business Week said that, and they said this about my first book, fresh thinking for solving the turnover problem in any economy, what did they mean? Well, what they meant was, if you convert engagement and turnover to dollars to get your executives' real attention, to make these things top-level metrics instead of secondary or tertiary metrics, and then they are then driven to set goals for leaders for engagement and retention and create reports, and then get leaders to conduct stay interviews, which is the best tool to use one-on-one, and then have those leaders develop forecasts and then be accountable for those forecasts and the other arrow back out to left for goals. Now you've not only built a very safe tool to improve engagement and retention at the leader level where it needs to be, but if you've ever worked in a company that was a sales company, this is exactly how sales work. It's salespeople, and everybody knows what the margins are. So for everything we sell, we know how much money we just made. So we can easily convert that to dollars. We have goals. We have tools. In this case, the tool is stay interviews. We forecast, and we're accountable for our goals and our forecast. So what we've done is take a business model and lay it over engagement and retention. So winding us down, a fun question. very fun question. Gallup has committed that they're going to survey the citizens of the world in over 150 countries every year for 100 years. 100 years to find out, simple thing, what makes people happy. What makes people happy? So they have released a study that says 8 years of data is in. And all they've said is, here's the leader. Here's the leader. So the leader is one of A, B, C, D, E. So would you guess the leader is good health? Would you guess it is a good job? Would you guess it is love and respect from others? Would you guess it is money? Or would you guess it is better life for your children? Good health, good job, love and respect from others, the kumbaya response, the money answer, or better life for your children. So 10 seconds, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the answer is a good job. So that's important because what it means is people want good jobs. We want people to want good jobs. We all want the same thing. We just have to find a better way to get there. And I assure you that if you do what I've told you today and you move the responsibility to leaders with goals and accountabilities, and it takes costs oftentimes to do that, and you give them tools like stay interviews, and they forecast each employee's length of service and each employee's engagement, you'll see all those numbers get better. It's a given. It's what we do as a business. It's what our clients do. It's the way to win. And getting back to the China story, it takes some courage to do it. So, Stephanie, I know you will come back to this slide to talk about recertification credit, and we will then take questions. I want to say, just in the event that I don't get to speak too much anymore except the questions, that this is my email address. You can see it. There's my cell phone number, in fact. And if you send me an email entitled Forecasting Engagement, if you'd like free tools on how to determine the cost of turnover and engagement, and I'll send you a paper on how to do that, or a training game for managers on stay interviews called the Stay Interview Game, feel free to email me, and I'll be glad to send that to you. Now, I'm going to move the slide back, but we're going to put this slide back up in just a moment. And Stephanie, I will turn control over to you and let you talk about recertification, and we'll do questions and answers as well.
Thank you, Dick. And before we move into the Q&A, just take a moment to note the program ID, 205131. For today's webinar, you will need to reference this number when you apply for your recertification credit at hrci.com. This will also appear on the certificate of completion that you will receive next week. So if anybody would like to start adding questions, you can add them through the chat feature, and we'll start addressing those as they come in. And I guess, Dick, to get it started with our first question, say you've identified a poor leader that is causing turnover. What are some steps you can take with them to improve their leadership skills?
You know, you direct a poor leader. I'm going to translate the term poor leader and say it's someone who their team doesn't trust, because it's the ultimate definition of a poor leader. And what I would do is coach them on behaviors and get, I'd either coach their manager to coach them, or worst case, coach them with their manager in the room, but never without their manager, ever, because they're accountable to their manager and not to you if you're in HR. So I would provide some coaching to them with their manager, or have their manager do it, and I would also then role play for them how to do stay interviews. I would give them suggestions on how to build trust, but I would then leave them on their own to sink or swim, because sometimes companies will say, well, our managers don't have time to do stay interviews, or this manager has trouble building trust, so maybe HR, you should do the stay interviews. No, never be surrogate to managers. Coach them, teach them, train them, hold their hands, just don't do things for them. They've got to learn to work on their own, to sink or swim on their own.
Thanks, Dick. And our next question is, Kimberly is a part of CBO. Would you take the same steps regarding goals and accountability for managers?
I would take the same steps for goals and accountability from the CEO down. So anyone who manages anyone should have goals and accountabilities, but the most important people are the people who are the first-line managers, because people don't stay or leave or engage or disengage for somebody 2 levels up or 3 levels up or for the CEO. They stay or leave and they engage or disengage for the person immediately above them, the person in their face, the person who represents work to them. So I would have it on every level, but the most important levels are from the bottom up.
And I'm not seeing any more questions, so... Oh, there, one just came in. Do you know any good books or resources for coaching tools employees can use when dealing with first-line managers or above they do not trust, so they can stay if they want?
So this would be a book for employees who don't trust their bosses. And if I understood it correctly, I don't have one. I would say if you work in a company and you know that, I would put my attention more toward getting the boss to be trustworthy or getting the boss's boss to recognize the person is not trustworthy and can't be and get them removed than focus on coaching the employee to move up. I think that's a great example of courage. It doesn't take a lot of courage to say to the employee, well, hang in there and I hope things work out, versus going after the real problem with people who have authority. But I would put my attention there. But if I missed the question, if I misunderstood, feel free to send me an email, and I will respond to you that way.
And our next one, in a clinical setting, the manager is often told to do clinical duties versus typical manager responsibilities. This is always a challenge. How do you make these clinical leaders accountable?
Yeah, I think it starts with the CEO. I think the CEO has to understand the data in the slide deck today. They have to understand that leaders drive retention and leaders drive engagement, and retention and engagement are worth a lot of money and they drive your productivity. And if we can get them to see that, they might restructure jobs. And I'll give you a great example is in so many hospitals, in all hospitals, the average number of direct reports of nurses to clinical managers is 80 to 1. And we throw some charge nurses in the middle and say they'll do your schedule. If you have a question, come ask them. But the way the job description is designed for charge nurses, they could be robots. Now, I'm not saying they are, because some of them are really good, but the job is more robotic. It's not about building relationships. So when it's 80 to 1, we're making the assumption that nurses don't have to have relationships with their managers. And we work with many hospitals that say nurse turnover is high. What do? We say, what's your ratio? Oh, gosh, we haven't thought about it. Well, it's about 80 to 1. Well, there's a good place to start. So if CEOs can understand the data on engagement and retention and the cost of it, they might be open to changing the organization. So in that example, let's suppose you just said for all of your charge nurses, you're going to change that job to be a nursing supervisor. And the charge nurses might have those skills, they might not, but we're going to change the job. We're going to invite charge nurses to apply for the job, and we're going to give an increase of, so I'm going to make up a number, $3,000 a year. Then if you have, so I'm going to make up another number, if you have 50 charge nurses and you pay them $3,000 more a year, and you increase your pay by $150,000 a year, but you cut your nurse turnover by 10 or 20%, bingo, you win. So we've got to get them thinking like that, but it's hard to get them thinking like that unless they know the cost first.
And Andrea also had a follow-up. She said patient-focused CEO mandates tend to push all employees to clinical.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Patient-focused CEOs tend to mandate that all employees focus on clinical.
Right. And that's because they don't understand the loss of productivity when leaders don't lead. And so as I think about this, I would have so much fun sitting in a room with one of those CEOs and pulling a few slides out of the deck to say, let me make sure you understand what happens when you have very highly paid people who aren't getting good leadership. because their leaders are so focused on clinical. And that person would come back and they'd say, well, yeah, I understand, but we can't be having a whole bunch of managers. Look, we have to cut costs. We have this thing over here with Medicare, and then we have the Affordable Care Act and all these things, and we can't afford to add more positions. We can't afford. Okay, let me show you how much money you're losing because your turnover is here and your engagement is here. So let's convert those things to dollars, and then let's look at if there's a way to have better leaders and people in positions more dedicated to leadership versus clinical, because you can drop these costs over here. Big thinking CEOs will get it.
Okay. And the next one from Karen. How do you sustain engagement?
How do you do what?
Sustain engagement.
I'm sorry, I still can't understand.
How do you sustain engagement?
Oh, sustain engagement. Thanks. I'm sorry. How do you sustain engagement? You know, simple answer. Tell leaders it's their job and not yours. And as a leader of a unit understands, when we do these surveys, I'm accountable, and I have this stay interview tool, and I have these other tools, and I've got to apply them. That's really the only way to sustain it, you know. And that's why we spend $1.53 billion a year, and we can't even move it. It's because we think we can move it with programs. We're only going to move it with leaders. And think about the best leaders you have, the ones who are trusted the most. Go compare their turnover and engagement to others who are less trustworthy, and I'll bet you'll see a significant difference. It's just got to be at a leader level. It's hard. I know people don't want to hear it because it's hard work and it takes courage, but that's the answer.
What's the best way to review exit interviews and use them to make changes?
I don't know. I will tell you that we have a best practice list of exit interviews and how to use them that we use sometimes with our clients. And if it's really important to someone, email me and I'll share with you what I can. But it's a very steep uphill climb. We actually have an exit interview format that we use with a few of our clients, and it has 3 questions, and it takes 3 minutes to do. It says, here's a list of reasons why you might have quit. Pick the one, the overwhelming one, the trigger one, the one that really made you leave. If you said of all these, here's the most important one, pick one. Because if you say pick all that apply, you can't get it to one. You can't get it to 2 or 3. You're just getting a whole bunch of data you don't know what to do. So it's pick one. And once they pick one, then we say, for that one, here's a drop-down box of about 15 different possibilities within the scope of that one. So if you say it's because of my manager, here's 15 descriptions of your manager, why you might have left. Or if you say it's because of communications, here's about 15 or so reasons for communication. Pick one. And then we say, on a 1 to 10 scale, would you recommend our company as a great place to work? And we score that on the Net Promoter method of how many people do versus don't. And we provide that data to clients. That's the only way I know to get good data. You hire vendors for a lot of money who ask 50 questions. Nobody's going to answer 50 questions, and you don't need 50 questions. But that's the way I know to do it.
Okay. And we are at 2 o'clock, but we have 3 more questions that we'll go ahead and cover so for anybody that wants to stay on the line. And the first one is, how does the millennial mentality of career movement stay only a year or 2 anywhere be addressed?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. And, you know, 2 ways I can think of to address it. One is to do stay interviews and find out what they want and try to build trust and keep them longer. You won't keep them forever. But the other is something we didn't talk about. When you hire, have some safeguards built in to where you know, for example, that realistic job previews, and if that's a new term for you, send me a note and I'll tell you more about it. Realistic job previews will drive people away who are short-timers. There's a way to make job offers that drives away short-timers. We know that employee referrals stay longer than people who are not referred by other employees. So there are certain hiring tools that will drive retention. We've also worked with a hospital that had a clear case of nurses would come there out of nursing school, they'd stay 2 years, then they'd move to the big city. And so we actually said, we're going to have a separate structured interview to to learn people's intentions for how long they will stay. And once HR does a screen, the manager does a screen, if everything looks right, we'll have a specially trained group of interviewers who are trained on how to do this structured interview about how long you will stay, and they'll become the Hawkeyes for measuring that. And after that third interview, if everybody agrees an offer is made, if everybody doesn't agree and the manager still wants to make the offer, they do, but they have the input from this, I'll call them this ninja team of people who ask very specific questions we designed for them to measure if people had long-term intentions to stay. And so far, so good.
What course of action do peers have when they feel that one of their own is contributing towards the trust issue of employees to supervisor?
So do peers have, peer employees have, if they think that one of those peers is contributing, could you read it again?
What course of action do peers have when they feel that one of their own is contributing towards the trust issue of employees to supervisor? So if one employee is creating an environment where the other employees cause to not trust their boss, maybe there's misinformation or something like that.
Or other trust-breaking behaviors.
Right.
Yes. Well, the golden rule is whatever a supervisor observes in an employee, the peer employees have already seen it before the supervisor. And I think that's almost always true. So when leaders know somebody is disrupting trust on the team, they better tell them once and fire them the second time. I mean, it's just something you can't tolerate because ultimately it comes back on the leader. So there's really no soft way to do it. You got to get those people out and let them try to change once, but it's unlikely they will.
How do you sustain employee engagement when the senior leadership group says managers are accountable for everything but don't provide the tools for them?
It's another hard one. I would show them data from this presentation, and I would recommend tools to them. And and they just have to understand that leaders need very specific direction on how to use tools. The reason I like stay interviews so much, and I've just seen them work so amazingly well, is because they bring with them a process. You will do a stay interview once a year with every employee. You will do a stay interview at 60 and 120 days with new hires. Here's how you will do it. You will submit a stay plan. You will submit a forecast. It's because there's a process. So is everybody going to do it? No, of course not. We have performance reviews and everybody does it. People do them late during it. But putting aside the obvious negatives, the positives are most people do them. And when they do them, they now have the tool because they're working one-on-one with employees to build trust and to provide the environment those employees want, which is so much more effective than any engagement survey which gives you one set of data for everybody on your team. It's just the way to go. And executives, if they see the data in this presentation, will hopefully understand that connection. If they don't, they don't, but this gives them the best chance to see it.
And final question, can you describe 3 characteristics of a trustworthy manager?
Yeah, I'll tell you 3 things they have to get right. They have to listen, they have to apologize, and they have to support the company policies. And I'll talk just a minute about that last one, support the company policies. It's so easy to say, well, there's a new policy. I don't know what they're thinking. And I'll roll my eyes because I think you'll trust me more if I show you that I agree with you that it's a bad one. But the flip side happens. When you don't support the company, the employees know that you're not supportive, and therefore you might not be supportive of them when they're not around too. And what happens in companies is executives make decisions based on their highest values. The highest values are paying the bills and being able to build a good organization that sustains over time and think long term. If you're in the middle of the company, where most of us are, you look at decisions and you say, how's that going to affect employees and how's it going to affect patients? That's what we think about. But executives can't always think about that. They have to think bigger picture and longer term. So it's natural that we don't always understand decisions the top makes. Now, it's easy to say, well, they need to explain it better. But you know what? Usually they don't. So if you're in the middle and you're a manager, you have to learn not only to say, but to believe statements like, hang on, I'm going to sneeze, I'm sorry. I apologize. You have to learn to say and believe statements like, the people at the top usually make good decisions, and they always know things we don't. So I'm on board, let's go. You have to not blame the company.
Okay, so that was our final question and all the time that we have today. So we want to thank everybody for attending. And again, if you're interested in contacting Dick, his information is on the screen, Finnegan at c-suiteanalytics.com, or on his cell at 407.694.3390. And if you're interested in learning more about health callings and health careers and our full suite of healthcare sourcing solutions, contact us at info@healthycareers.com. So hope everybody has a great weekend, and thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all. Feel free to contact me if I can be of help to you in any way. Have great weekends too. Bye.
This concludes today's conference call. We ask that you please disconnect your line.